Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Poetry Africa session called Roots and Verses, where we're here with a diverse selection of poets from the African diaspora who are here to share with us what their identities mean, what rooting means for them, and of course, some of their wonderful poems. We're here with Mariuska Mokenge, who is followed by more than 50,000 people on social networks and is one of the standard bearers of slam in the Congo Brazzaville. A lawyer by training, she has made her debut in the theater in 2009 and takes part in several theatrical creations. In 2015, she trained in slam alongside Congolese slammer protege Hayville and is committed and inspired by strong women figures like Kim Pavita, Oprah, Michelle Obama, Angelique Kidjo, and Fatou Diome. She is distinguished by incisive texts and borrowings from humanism. And I would like to ask Mariuska to please introduce herself with a poem. Mariuska, thank you for being here with us, and we look forward to hearing your poetic offering introducing yourself.
Hello everybody, je suis Mariuska la slameuse, artiste slameuse congolaise. À chaque vers que j'extirpe de mes viscères, je fais perdre des os à ma muse sur des textes intemporels et empreints de colère. Car avec mon art, je fais des cassures dans le temps et je m'axiurge contre les cassures du bled qui ne font pas la queue au cerveau secrètement. Synergie poétiquement urbaine sur des morceaux de papier ou des morceaux de pierre, bouche largement ouverte ou clos, je m'exprime car les écrits sortent seuls sur ma peau. Couleur ébène noire, je suis fière de l'être. Vivante et sans complexe, je suis fière de l'être. Poétesse donc, fière de l'être. Quelque chose me dit qu'en ce jour, je suis fière d'y être. Slam. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariuska. And I'm looking forward to hear more about how your identity is rooted in your poetry and in your Africanness. And now we're going to go to Raquel Lima, who is a poet and transdisciplinary artist who has a degree in artistic studies in performing arts from the Faculty of Arts in the University of Lisbon and is a PhD candidate in post-colonial studies at the Center for Social Studies at the University in Coimbra. Her research focuses on orature, slavery, and Afro-diasporic movements, and she's co-organized the conference Afro-Europeans, Black Invisibilities Contested in 2019. She's presented her academic work at various international conferences, most notably the conference Authoring Human Rights in West Africa and Beyond, Expressions in Slaveries in Literature, in Texts and Arts, Visuals, at the University of the Cape Coast in Ghana in 2023. And the conference Decolonial Remains, Scrutinizing African Studies in Africa, the Unfinished Business of Decolonization, at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria in 2022. In 2022, she was a speaker at the Loophole of Retreat during the Venice Biennale, a keynote speaker of the World Congress of Women in Mozambique, and in 2023, she's one of the artists at the Biennale of Sao Paulo. She's published the book, and please forgive my pronunciation on this, Ingenuidad, Inocencia, and Ignorancia in 2019, and co-founded the Black Union for Arts in 2021. Her work is at the crossroads between art, activism, and academia. Welcome, Raquel. Thank you so much for making time for joining us. Please, would you introduce yourself with a poem?
Sure. This poem, I will say it in Portuguese, but it's called Planet Africa, Planeta África. Sou afrodescendente, afrodisíaca, afrodiaspórica, afroconsciente, afrofuturista, afro-resiliente, afro-não-condescendente. Gostaria que África não fosse prefixo inconsequente, que fosse planeta em vez de continente. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Raquel. My limited understanding of Portuguese, but that's so beautiful. I would love to pick up on some of those themes in the discussion. But first, let's introduce our third participant, Ashwin Mberi. Ashwin is a Zimbabwean who is based in Namibia. Seasoned poet, a TV presenter, an MC voiceover artist, a theater writer, an actor, and director. With over a decade in performances and art curation under his belt, this multidisciplinary Afrocentric creative has been known to enthrall audiences with a commanding stage presence, thought-provoking content, and charisma. And some of the important performances that Ashwin has done is being the opening act, the opening poetry act for the Burna Boy Love Damini tour in Namibia in 2022. A solo poetry concert, Bantu Boy Blooming, in 2018. The Gaza Goes Symphony Poetry Act in 2023. And it's the 2 times Best Male Actor nominee for the Theatre and Film Awards in Namibia, and 2 times host of the Namibia Annual Music Awards. So thank you. Welcome, Ashwin. Thank you so much for making time to join us. Please would you introduce yourself with a poem?
All right. Who are you when there's nobody but you to see you make U-turns on the ideas that ought to drive you towards your dreams? Do you hush the temptation to quit by creating art that screams, I am here, not as anybody else, but as myself, carving my name into the sky so that the ancestors can read my handwriting? How's it going, guys?
Hi, Ashwin. Thanks so much for that. So as you guys can see, we're working with multiple languages here, which is really exciting and quite challenging as a facilitator, because we want to have the conversation as a conversation that flows, a conversation where we can discuss borders, where we can discuss identities. But we're going to be helped in this conversation because Raquel speaks. How many languages, Raquel?
6.
6.
Nice.
And I understand that you're also learning another one.
Yes, I'm learning Kimbundu from Angola.
Beautiful. So Raquel is sometimes going to help translate between the rest of us and Mariuska, who speaks French. But Raquel, maybe we can open this conversation with a question and some thoughts about from you about language and poetry. What does speaking 6 languages mean for you as a poet, and what is learning the seventh language from Angola, which I understand is your mother tongue? How is that impacting your poetry and who you are?
Sure. No, it's an interesting question because the languages I know, they are all colonial languages. We are talking about Portuguese, English, French, Italian, and Castellano, Spanish. So to be able to now learn an African language from my mother's country has to do with a process of reconnecting with my own roots, and is also related with my PhD research, because I'm working on slavery songs that are sang in Kimbundu. So, but all of this in a very deep way is a movement of reconnecting with a knowledge that I didn't have access to because I was born and I grew up in Portugal, and my subjectivity was constructed in this in the European context. And lately, I mean, I started to engage in issues of social justice, anti-racism, and of course, the issue of blackness. It became more and more important to me and my identity, and is also reflected in my poetry. But more than speculating, although speculating is very important, I also want to try to create changes in my way of existing in this world. So I passed my last 2 years in Africa, in the country of my father, which is an island, 2 islands called Saint Tomé and Príncipe, and trying to understand other ways of understanding time, solidarity, life, sustainability. I mean, other logics. I think that's really, really important, and what is fascinating me at this time, not only in my life in general, but in my literature also.
I really like the point about other logics. I think that we get so stuck in kind of Western and still colonial forms of what logic is and what logic means. So I find it very interesting about when you're kind of moving spatially into a space of your father, of your ancestors, that you're speaking about other logics. Does that come out in your poetry as well?
I'm trying, because my poetry was always very oral. Before I published a book, I was making part of poetry slams. I was making part of spoken word events. So the orality had always a very important role. And afterwards, I understood that it's not only about orality, but it's more about orator, which is orator is a concept that a linguistic in Uganda formulated in the 60s. And orator is a philosophical and ontological dimension. And when I say different logics, I also include orator. How can we exist in a world that is not so obsessed by printing and archiving knowledge in books? How can we share knowledge and ideas through the connection with the elements of nature, by the songs that my grandmother used to sing, by the advices that a fisherman gives to kids about the sea level. You know, all this knowledge that is not printed, for me, is very valuable. And my poetry, I try in my poetry to conserve it. That's why my last poetry book is an audiobook. It's not only a book that you read, but also a book to listen.
I think that's so important. I mean, I'm a historian, and so the question of archive and what archives are considered valid and who is silenced in those archives and who do we find when we explore other primarily oral archives is really fascinating. I'd like to open this discussion up a little bit to Mariuska. Can you tell us a bit about what makes you who you are?
Je sais pas s'il y a besoin de traduction.
Merci pour la question. Je pense que ce qui fait de moi ce que je suis, c'est ce combinement d'histoire, de ce que je vis au quotidien, mais aussi de ce que j'entreprends faire demain. Nous sommes la somme de nos rêves, de nos challenges, de nos défis, et aussi des personnes que nous rencontrons qui nous influencent d'une manière ou d'une autre. Ce que je suis, c'est mes poèmes dans lesquels j'ai la possibilité de pouvoir m'exprimer, j'ai la possibilité de pouvoir me dire autrement. Ce que je suis, ce sont les rêves que j'entreprends pour déjà mon propre quotidien, pour mon pays, pour mon continent, pour ma progéniture. Ce que je suis, c'est ces rêves que j'essaie d'immortaliser à travers mes poèmes, que j'essaie de partager au quotidien à travers mes activités avec les autres. Ce que je suis, je pense aussi que c'est ce que je rêve de devenir parce que j'ai tendance à vouloir me remettre en cause parce que, comme on le dit, nul n'est parfait, pour essayer un peu de me projeter, voir la personne que je serai et ne pas me contenter de celle que aujourd'hui. Ce que je suis, ce sont ces personnes que j'apprécie, que j'admire, leur combat, les valeurs qu'ils défendent, et puis aussi comment est-ce qu'ils arrivent à être présents, non seulement en tant que femmes, parce que dans nos femmes, mais pas que femmes, citoyennes du monde aussi, est un challenge au quotidien. Donc, je suis la somme de ces personnes aussi que je rencontre tous les jours. Je suis la somme de ces rêves que je partage avec mes proches. Je suis la somme de mes vers, de mes textes. Je suis la somme de mes poèmes. Je suis aussi la somme de toutes ces personnes que je veux influencer positivement, impacter positivement. Et mon rêve, ce serait que ma vie ne serve à quelque chose de plus pour les autres, que ma vie soit comme le symbole de cette petite fille audacieuse qui a voulu utiliser la poésie pour parler à l'autre.
Okay. Thank you, Mariuska. That's so I have very, very limited French, but I can pick up from what you're saying, kind of parts of who you are, talking about power, talking about positivity, talking about poetry as a language, and it's very exciting to try and listen beyond the language, which I think we do in poetry, with poetry as its own language. That even if the poem is in the language that we know, that we listen beyond the language for the language of poetry. So thank you for that opportunity. Raquel, can I ask if Mariuska brings up anything that you would like to engage with in what she's saying, that you just go ahead with that, because I'm kind of lacking in that ability. So just as the conversation goes, if please feel free to pick up on what Mariuska is saying. Ashwin, let's come to you. You're also so you're a Zimbabwean living in Namibia. So you're in the African diaspora in a different kind of sense, and so language is also then a thing for you where you are, because you're not living in your mother tongue. So can you tell us a bit about what makes you who you are, and where you are?
All right. Well, I mean, I come from a beautiful country, but it's a country that is marred by a lot of political instability. So the idea of a Zimbabwean anywhere in Southern Africa is a common sight. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, there's over 2 million Zimbabweans just in South Africa. And, you know, it's sort of considered like an immigration crisis, so to speak. But that's the position we've been found in. It was a country that, you know, post-independence 1982 was definitely lauded, particularly for its educational system, which was also steeped in the British colonial system. And because of that, with more and more of Southern Africa, even Namibia, the national language that is used, it's not the national language, I'll say the official language for communication is English, but there's like dozens different languages. But for Zimbabwean, we then became in that sense a little valuable around Africa because of our educational system. And some people might say that's part of the reason you don't get much intervention from other African countries in Zimbabwe, because it's that whole situation of cheap labor, folks who've had to spread out, and people who are just trying to figure out ways to survive. And that's just been my story. I moved to Namibia for, I'd say, around the age of 22 to the University of Namibia. And upon moving there, the idea was initially to study law, but I was put in a position where I had to fend for myself, I would say 3 months from coming to Namibia. And that was the time I had to draw from the skills and, you know, the talents that I believe myself to have. And poetry then became an outlet. I managed to get into different communities, and from poetry I ended up in television. And it's still a tale. It's the Zimbabwean typical diasporan tale, where we often have to adapt to different countries and cultures. You might find if you're in South Africa, you could interact with a Zimbabwean and you won't know that they're Zimbabwean until they tell you they're Zimbabwean, because there's also xenophobia. So we also hide our identities a lot, and covering that blanket is the English language that, you know, we all apparently speak so well. So we essentially survive on this thing economically, but we have to put it away once we are in society, because, you know, we're always afraid to kind of stir up any adverse emotions. And that's really been my story. Like, I'm listening to the stories of these two wonderful poets, who, by the way, I'm going to follow right after this. Just looking at your journeys, particularly also in academia, and I'm sort of a little bit like, in the sense that, of course, all my poetry is steeped in identity. I have been an activist for many years, and now I'm in television media, more focused on the journalism side. However, I still perform, but I find myself still having to be Zimbabwean, in the sense that the bottom line always draws me back. So, for example, yes, I'm a poet, but I do poetry for banks. Like, you know, my most noteworthy performance was for Burna Boy, who I absolutely love. The fact that I got to open for him was absolutely fantastic. But that's, you know, more on the entertainment side of things. Essentially, that's just how I've been navigating. I essentially fit poetry into all spaces. It started off as a survival tactic, and ultimately it's just a part of my identity. But with regards to the English itself, my great-grandfather was an English teacher. My grandfather was an English teacher. But at the same time, all our communication together has been in Shona. And I know my history very well in my mother tongue. You know, just like Raquel was talking about orality, just about everything I know about myself is from oral tradition. It's from, you know, being told this is who you are. And so for diasporan Zimbabwean, especially a poet, as much as I spend time, you know, interacting intimately with the space around me, not just to survive, I really look forward to those moments where some sometimes I can just be with a Zimbabwean and we can just speak in the language and fully know each other, knowing that leaving home means that there's less chance of you being known than there is of you being useful.
That's such a powerful line. Leaving home means there's less chance of you being known than there is of you being useful. Wow. And I mean, it's interesting that then you're talking about speaking to somebody, the comfort of speaking to somebody in your language. Which language do you generally write in, if you're most comfortable in? Or
I mean, it's English. The colonialists did a good number on me, so it's a lot of English, and it can be really superfluous at times. But particularly when I'm writing things that relate to home being myself, I definitely bridge into Shona. But I guess because in Zimbabwe, the literacy rate has been over 90% for decades, so I expect to be understood, but there's certain things I can only say in my mother tongue. And I think we all have this kind of experience where, certain things can only really be expressed and understood and felt to the core once you hit that note of the language that you usually use, or the one you come from. And actually, that's I'm really interested in Raquel's story and journey, because I think it's fascinating to be this educated as well, and still learning more about yourself.
And when it comes to the language that you dream in, what language did you dream in?
Oh dear. I suspect it's English. I truly suspect it's English. However, the thoughts and the ideas remain African.
Yes, no, of course. And I mean, this is the thing, we're working with what coloniality did to Africa, what coloniality continues to do to Africa and the world. And that the processes of reclaiming and drawing on threads to sew up those wounds happen in many spaces, in many languages, and through you guys. Would you like to share a poem in Shona? Or
yeah, sure. I've got one right here. So this one, it's got some rhythm to it, because I had written it when I've never released music, but I make a lot of music with poetry. And this is one of those songs which I was calling on my ancestors. It speaks, to be quite frank, against the current establishment in my country. And the idea is reclaiming. When I say hunza munda wangu, that means give me my land. Badzane mombe nembuzi dzangu, my whole, my cow, because I don't know if you guys know this, but there was a time Zimbabwe was known as the breadbasket of Africa. And where we are now, coming from that point, is a really long distance. So it's also talking about, the system that made us lose so much, and just trying to reclaim that. Now, Mbuya Nehanda was our ancestral leader. She was very much a very physical human being, and she's the one who spurred us into the liberation struggle. We saw her as a spirit medium, and she was hanged by the British on a tree which is actually outside the flat my father and I used to live. And so Mbuya Nehanda, I was calling on her strength, as most a lot of Shonas do, who believe in the traditional roots, calling on her once again to deliver us. The wars we had of liberation were known as the Chimurengas, Chimurenga 1, Chimurenga 2. And over here I speak of Chimurenga, the third Chimurenga, which feels like, the war wasn't over. We got rid of the colonialists, but we did not get rid of the effects of colonialism, and some of the traits that we abhorred in the colonialists were adopted by folks who decided to lead us. Okay, so let me get into it. It's got a bit of rhythm. I hope you don't mind. Hunza munda wangu, badzane mombe nembudzi dzangu. Kana uri wangu, sei uchitora zvinhu zvangu. Aiwa ini hangu, ndatoneta ndatopedza shangu. Ndichitsvaga kwangu, kwandinogona kufema hangu. Nehandasvika pano, vanondiedza. Nehandadzika pano, itazvinoyera. Manje ndasvikirwa, manje ndagarirwa, manje handizi ndega. Manje we move together, banje for any weather. Chimurenga, chinoda rudo. kwete zvishuwo zvekutidzivirira kusimuka muchitidzikisira kufamba muchingotidzimbirira. And so yeah, that's the poem, and part of it I'm saying, why do you keep taking from us? I'm calling on Nehanda to come down. And then when I say manjenda shikira, kushikira is to be possessed. So in the poem, I say, now I'm possessed. Now she has taken over my spirit, and we move together. And chimurenga chinoda rudo, which means that the war for liberation needs to be led by love. And that's essentially the poem.
That's so powerful. That's so powerful. And I think leading on to one of the other questions that I wanted to hear your inputs on is kind of, and I mean, I guess it's also, there's, Poetry Africa is a festival, an African festival that's held in South Africa, but South Africa has this horrific reality of xenophobia that Ashwin was talking about, that I'm sure Raquel and Mariuska also know about. But it's speaking to also Ashwin's talk about himself as an activist and some of Raquel's academic work. The world is burning right now in so many different places. And how do we use poetry, but also the identities that we've been speaking about, kind of using who you are and who you are in the African diaspora, who you are as African. How do we use that towards building hope? I mean, maybe I can ask this to Raquel first, and then I'll come back to Ashwin, and then come to Marius.
Okay, such a difficult question.
Yeah, just a small.
But it's a very interesting one also. It was very, very inspiring to listen to Mariuska and Ashwin. And more because of this, the versatility and the vulnerability that we must have to deal with our movements, our diasporic existences.
Mm-hmm.
And in one hand, we sometimes erase part of it, but on the other, it makes us more fluid and more adaptable. And also our poetry become more plastic, and it becomes more accessible, not only to be staged in a poetry slam event, but also with music, with dance, with performance arts, etc. And that's what I've been doing. And for the last month, I travel a lot, and I had this sensation of the end of the world, which is a very paradoxical, with a simultaneous sensation of a huge celebration from some global majorities around the world. So I think we are dealing with a very intense and politically aggressive moment, and I think this is also a urge to re-signify our references. It was, for instance, Ashwin was saying Shimurenga 1, Shimurenga 2, Shimurenga 3, and I was thinking we learned about Global War 1, Global War 2, and we are in Global War 3. And what is war? Who defines what is the most important war? Congo is in a war for many years, and Mariuska can tell more about this than me. But how can we understand the end of the world not in a Western perspective, but in considering all the tensions that historically we have been dealing with, not only in Africa, but with our Black African diasporic bodies. So with my poetry, I think I try to embrace these issues. There's a lot of poems that have to do with reconnecting with the roots, with social justice, with economical issues. Not all of them. I have a lot of contemplative poems, which is also a defense mechanism that we must have, because we probably start writing poetry so we can escape from the chaos. So poetry has also this therapeutical function, which is to make us able to fabulate about other existence, other ways of existing. So
je ne vous entends plus.
Hein? Tu n'écoutes pas?
Je ne vous entends plus.
Mariuska, so Raquel, I think what happened is I was just typing to Mariuska about where we're going to go next, and I was mentioning your comment on the ongoing war and asked if she wanted to discuss on it, but I didn't mean now. I meant when I come to her with asking the question. If you just want to, would you mind translating that?
Non, c'est bon, mais je pense qu'elle écoute pas. Mariuska.
Okay. We'll wait until she gets back. That's fine. Raquel, do you want to carry on with what you were saying? You were talking about the kind of paradoxical function of poetry, as you were saying that you don't shy away from the issues of the kind of the world burning, but that it's got a paradoxical function for you.
Yeah, sometimes because there's a role of denouncing the world issues that we are living, but there's also there's also a way of celebrating the good things we have, and there's also a way of escaping from all these problems. So I think poetry has different functions and in different times of my life. But in general, I cannot dissociate it from my Black woman body in Europe right now. So of course, it will reflect all of these tensions and social asymmetries that we have to deal with.
And I mean, I always think the functions aren't paradoxical. I think that poetry, in giving us the escape, in giving us the hope.
Je ne vous entends pas.
She's not hearing us. Mariuska is saying that she cannot listen to us.
Oh, okay. I thought Anton was understand. Sorry. Okay.
I don't know if it's a technical thing.
I don't understand
you.
Mariuska, tu comprends pas ou tu écoutes pas? Tu n'écoutes pas?
Je ne vous écoute pas.
Ah, ok. Et là tu comprends qu'est-ce que je dis?
No, I think we have to carry on, and we'll hope that the sound comes back for Mariuska, and then she can come back in.
Do you understand me?
We can hear you. We can hear you. Raquel, I was going to ask if you have a poem that maybe touches on anything that you've been saying that you would like to share.
I have one. I have one about the drawers that I have to open so I can find my identity. I'm just a bit worried with Mariuska.
Yeah, me too. I'm not quite sure what to do because I don't think we have a technical person with us on the call.
But maybe she can answer because we can listen to her, so she can answer.
Okay. So I'll tell her we can type and ask questions in the chat.
Okay. Meanwhile, I will read this poem, which is called "I Open One More Drawer." Abro mais uma gaveta, à procura de respostas ocultas sobre a minha existência incompleta e na árdua tarefa de buscar peças de um puzzle fragmentado, estilhaçado por água fria, em diferentes cantos do mundo e não tem um sentido como guia. Não vejo, não toco, não ouço, não cheiro, nem saboreio a verdade que me falta. Então abro mais uma gaveta à procura de um sentido no formato circular da oratura, porque a tradição não é só feita de livros. Fotos e palavras por traduzir, línguas que desconheço, lutas por persistir, vitórias que não sonhei, fracassos e demência, tenho presente a ausência. No fundo da mesma gaveta, o outro lado do oceano. Feridas em carnes vivas, força e medo à flor de peles fundidas. Então abro mais uma gaveta e tenho sementes com cicatrizes. Já não basta ter asas que voam, é preciso ter asas com raízes. Just to say that the last two verses, they mean, it's not enough to have wings that fly, we need to have wings with roots. So the roots are here.
That's so beautiful. I love that. Wings with roots. That's so powerful. And I have to say, it's so amazing hearing these poems in other languages. I'm just getting goosebumps because you really do get a sense of the power coming through without understanding the language, which is amazing. But I love that, wings with roots. Ashwin, do you want to come in on the thought of wings with roots? And then if you want to on to the other question of how do we use poetry, or how do we use our identities, our rooting for hope when the world is burning, then feel free.
Yeah, no, I think Wings with Roots is such a powerful, powerful statement, especially for those of us who have no choice but to fly. When you have no choice but to fly, it's difficult to not simply solely focus on the flying. But at least when you have Wings with Roots, you understand where you're flying from. And you know the places you ought to fly back to in order to fly higher. And as Africans, time and time again, of course, the world is going to go its own direction. But I think ultimately we found that we go further the more steeped we are in our understanding of ourselves. Sometimes, I do think there's a lot of pressure with tracking back. For example, I've got a couple of friends who were also raised in the diaspora who don't know how to speak their mother tongues and that kind of thing. And some of them allow that to be a separation from their people. When really, no matter where you are always a reflection of your ancestry. It is just a matter of really knowing that and embracing that. Yeah, that's such a powerful statement. And look, the world is burning. As it has been for a while. And the artist's job is never an easy one at this time, because we are always tasked with asking the important questions, documenting and archiving what is happening, and calling truth to power, because we have no choice but to be a reflection of our times. That is our prison and our freedom. That we have to be here. There's no way around it. We have to be here. We have to speak to what's going on. And as Africans, we've got a lot to speak about. And the contexts are so different. You know what I mean? For example, if a European poet has a poem about reducing emissions and global warming and climate change, it's a real emergency. But as an African, I would also know that Africa has contributed the least to the global footprint. So I'm not going to talk about it the way you're talking about it, but the earth is burning. So it's that interesting space where the poem has to prioritize what they see, trust what you see, and hope that you can say something to spark something in other people to either make a change, because sometimes change is hard to come by. It really is. And I've come to learn that change is going to happen when change wants to happen. But sometimes I do find the artist's duty being also helping others be present. Just be there. You know what I mean? I know you want to change things, but sometimes you just need to walk outside and take in what's going on without always inundating your conscience with what's going on in the world, especially because you're not responsible for a lot of it, but you're always responsible for the vessel that you carry. And so this is not to say anything must be ignored. By no means do I believe anything must be ignored, but I do believe that the artist's first priority should be the artist. And sometimes that could mean that the artist is going to say, listen, the world is burning, but in here, I'm having a different experience and I'm going to share that. And that could absolutely be valuable to everybody. But yes, the world is burning. There's no way around it as artists. As Nina Simone said, we have to be a reflection of our times. I don't have an escape route. I'm either a poet or a journalist. So I'm going to be there, and we have to be there for it. But just like Raquel was talking about, I guess art also, providing that catharsis. especially when we're going through different motions and spaces, it's invaluable to us. But we have to talk about the world as it is, and I feel like I trust the artist's opinion more than most folks' opinions, simply because we're the ones, for the most part, who have to fight to be ourselves. No one has to fight to be a lawyer. Of course, financially, etc., etc. But the concept of being a lawyer is well welcomed in the world. The concept of being a doctor is welcomed in the world. The concept of being an artist is usually up for debate. And that's why I think it's always good that we stay steeped in our creativity and understand that we are absolutely valuable to the world, particularly now, because any fight that is happening physically is a fight that is certainly happening spiritually, and we are always supposed to be present for that.
I mean, I think there's so much power. Here, Mariuska's back. Welcome back, Mariuska. Thank you. Thank you for coming back. I think there's so much power in what you're saying, Ashwin, and I just want to come back to that thought about staying present in the poetry and the poetry making you stay present. And I think that coming back to that image of wings with roots, it can force an accountability as well. Looking at where we come from, where we are, can force an accountability. I mean, if I look at my roots are blood soaked, right? And there's a reality in that I need to stay present with, and account for. I think that I would like to, Ashwin, do you have another poem that you would like to share that speaks to what you're speaking about? And then I'm going to come to
this one was this one was, it was really me just revving myself up. It was during a difficult time in my life. And I was seeing myself as myself, but also just as a diaspora in Zimbabwean. The only lines which are there in Shona are at the beginning. Quick question, how are we with cuss words?
I can't speak for Poetry Africa, but I think we're good. I think like anything that's open to poetry must be open to cuss words.
Yeah, because awesome. All right, so this was one of those moments where I had to sit down, reflect, re-strategize, understand where I am, that kind of thing. So the first lines, which are in Shona, Ramba uchi famba, Ramba uchi chaga pau no kwana. But if you don't fit Garawava, Ramba uchi famba means keep walking. Ramba uchi chaga pau no kwana, keep trying to find your space. But if you don't fit in Garawava, if you don't fit in, make sure you always leave. So that's just the first line, and then everything else is going to be in English. Yes, okay, let me just get into it. One foot after the other, Ramba uchi famba, Ramba uchi chaga pau no kwana. And if you don't fit Garawava, because you've come way too far for you to be just another brother, just another othered bastard. Whenever you enter homes unknown to your soul, go forth, but don't lose your gold. So before they pickpocket your goals, sow a hidden pouch for the times you forgot to vouch for your soul. And only take nuggets out to make sure the family is eating. The man in me is fleeing, but the God in me is seeing a new season in, like Caucasian folks giving in to Kapana sauce or basic seasoning. No simple sins, no sims, just sims like me, living film real like realities, writing to ignite in you what I sometimes can't find in me. Should I be closed off when I know you ought to know what my third eye can see? Keep food for my own soul till my iris gets eye test and my ancestry starts side-eyeing me. Like I should be ironing me, straighten myself out and vacate the safe house. Let others take the safe route. When they fold in, you stay out. Walk through the jungle, and though you may stumble, remember God don't fumble. Know when to cause trouble and when to stay humble. And above all, love yours. But know the type of love to hold and the type of love to show. I hope you get both. I hope they know you're devoted to more than the glow. Your path was forged in light, and they've got the right to receive more than the show. Beautiful black brilliance, born of a beautiful black death. That's a beautiful black deliverance. This beautiful black existence is a breath of fresh air for their spirits, like lit incense sticks. So give them all that shit. Screw emotional distance. If you've got feelings, don't ignore that shit. Explore that shit. And remember that moments of darkness aren't all life is. Go where more light is. You were born like this. You know what your life is. So don't act like you don't know when the show time is. Show up every time, because there may never be another show like this.
I love that. Go where light is. Go where light is.
Yeah, go where the light is. And I said, this is the one line, borrow for beautiful, beautiful black death. It's a line that throws quite a few people off. I don't mean beauty in that sense. I mean just in the poetic nature of my coming to life. My mother passed on in 1998 when I was 7, but for me to be born, prior to me, she had a miscarriage, and after me, she lost her baby. So I'm essentially the only child that she has, the only existence of my mother on here, planet Earth. And for me to see that as, some kind of, it hinges on my purpose. It makes me feel like I'm meant to be here, regardless. And I want to embrace that and, like I said, stay where the light is.
That's so beautiful. And I think also the interconnectedness between life and death is something powerful to think about as well. Thanks, Ashwin. And so I'm going to come back to Mariuska, who dropped out for a second when we were asking this question. So I'm going to come back to you with this question that we were talking about, the fact that the world is burning. So how do we use our identities, our poetry, to build hope?
Dans ce monde aujourd'hui en plein de tensions, dans ce monde qui brûle, dans ce monde qui est aussi en quête de paix, nos identités, je pense, est le seul rempart qui nous reste pour sauver l'humanité. Alors, comment utiliser nos identités pour rappeler à l'humain que nous pouvons être unis dans la diversité? Je pense que ça commence déjà par mettre sur la table nos valeurs universelles. Au-delà de nos identités personnelles, montrer aux gens que l'humain est l'espèce qui doit survivre au-delà de toutes ces différences avec l'autre. Au Congo, nous sommes dans un pays où on parle plusieurs langues. Nous avons 2 langues au niveau national, donc le Lingala et le Kituba. Et généralement, lorsqu'il s'agit de réunir le peuple à travers une langue, nous prenons ces 2 langues-là pour essayer un peu de consolider notre union nationale. Et aujourd'hui, à travers toutes les tensions qu'il y a à travers le monde, je pense que la poésie peut nous servir à mettre en avant nos identités pour montrer qu'au-delà de nos particularités, ce qui est plus fort, comme on le dit, ce qui nous réunit, la vie, ce monde que nous avons en partage, ce monde que nous devons sauvegarder. Ça passe par faire comprendre à tout un chacun que nos différences ne doivent pas être nos différences. Parce qu'on n'a pas la même couleur de peau, c'est pas parce qu'on ne parle pas la même langue, c'est pas parce que on ne vit pas les mêmes réalités que pour autant on doit s'entretuer. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui les poètes ont cette mission-là de pouvoir rappeler à l'humain la valeur même de la vie, la valeur même de l'existence, pour que quelque part on essaie un peu de poétiser la vie, pour essayer un peu de, comme j'aime le dire, mettre un peu du baume au cœur aux gens. Et la poésie devient à cet effet donc comme étant une arme pour adoucir les mœurs, une arme pour consolider les liens entre les peuples, une arme pour connaître l'autre, une arme pour aussi faire à ce qu'on apprenne ce qu'on appelle par la tolérance, qu'on apprenne à tolérer les autres, à tolérer la différence et à faire comprendre à l'humanité, à faire comprendre aux autres que c'est important aujourd'hui avec tout ce qu'il y a à travers le monde, d'essayer de taire nos égos, d'essayer de taire nos moi, comme on le dit, pour essayer d'avancer. Et notre identité, justement, c'est elle qui peut nous permettre de montrer que je suis congolaise, mais je ne suis pas au final différente de la tchadienne, différente de la guinéenne, différente du béninois, parce qu'on vit presque les mêmes réalités, parce qu'on a presque les mêmes challenges. On veut que nos pays avancent, on veut que notre continent avance. Et donc, essayons de taire nos différences, de taire tout ce qui ne nous unit pas pour essayer d'avancer ensemble. Et si on voit dans les pays où vraiment les guerres sont très, très importantes, l'art, pour ne pas dire la poésie, nous sert de souffle d'oxygène, si je veux dire, pour la population, parce que c'est à travers l'art qu'on essaie un peu de voir le monde des possibles, qu'on essaie de voir, d'apercevoir cette lueur d'espoir au bout du tunnel, pour se dire que malgré toutes ces peines qu'on essaie un peu de rencontrer de gauche à droite, malgré les armes qui sont dans notre quotidien, comment est-ce que nous pouvons nous utiliser ce que nous sommes, utiliser nos valeurs qui au final sont des valeurs universelles, les valeurs de fraternité, les valeurs de solidarité, les valeurs d'unité. Comment est-ce qu'on peut utiliser ces valeurs-là pour essayer de rassembler le monde, pour essayer d'unir les peuples et de leur faire comprendre que si nous ne nous acceptons pas tels que nous sommes avec nos différences ethniques, raciales, mais nous allons mourir comme des idiots, comme le disait Nelson Mandela. Donc, c'est important aujourd'hui pour nous de pouvoir comprendre que à travers le dialogue, à travers la poésie, nous pouvons reconstruire ce monde meilleur que nous voulons. Et ce monde meilleur que nous voulons, je pense que c'est un monde dans lequel il n'y a pas d'armes, il n'y a pas de feu, il n'y a pas de guerre. C'est ce monde où nous sommes capables de nous dire entre frères et sœurs certaines choses sans pourtant en venir aux mains, sans pourtant faire couler le sang. Le monde que nous voulons, nous, en tant qu'artistes, en tant que poètes, c'est ce monde-là où nous sommes capables de nous accepter tels que nous sommes, avec nos différences, et nous sommes capables de régler nos problèmes à travers la parole, à travers la discussion.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like I'm understanding more French than I would have given myself credit for. But from the small bits that I got, there's such powerful stuff in what you're saying about you finding the humanity, about uniting people through dialogue, through poetry, about the different what people are living in different spaces. You're mentioning different African countries, but that it's the same experiences, the same reality across the difference, and that we need to see across the difference to build this better world. I definitely heard you talking about building a better world, and I really appreciate that thought. That's the thought that keeps me going, is that we are working for this better world. We are working through our lives, through poetry, through different spaces for this better world. Do you have a poem that would speak to what you're saying?
Yes.
Thank you.
De mes racines pharaoniques, telle une queen Néfertiti, je viens ouvrir les portes des pyramides pour rendre à Césaire ce qu'ils ont donné à César, arracher à Pythagore ce qui revient à Senghor, car ce que leur histoire ne dit pas, c'est que la connaissance est née en Afrique, sanctuaire de leurs théorèmes sur nos hiéroglyphes. Ils ont beau traiter mon continent de contenant sans contenu, de berceau de la pauvreté, de la misère, des épidémies en continu. Ce qu'ils oublient, c'est qu'un enfant a beau chialer, se rébeller, il reviendra toujours entre les bras de sa mère. Sur les traces de Mamangunga, la prêtresse, sur le chemin de Kimpavita, la prophétesse, sur les saveurs des prouesses d'Alain Mabonkou, j'interroge l'histoire pour que l'avenir ne profite que des bons coups. Telle une vraie bantou, je m'enivre des plus nobles lettres de Soni Laboutansi. Avec l'audace des Menyali, je remplis mon âme des merveilles de Chikaya Utamsi. Rempli des vérités de Fatou Diom, Sankara et Martin sans pareil ont lutté, l'apartheid écrasé par Mandela. Je m'imprègne de l'unité Nkrumah. Je prends mon héritage tel une Sundiata. J'avance dans les rues du monde tête haute. Ma fierté d'être africaine, nul ne peut m'ôter, car la première déclaration des droits de l'homme vient des nôtres. Si je mens, peuple mandingue. Moi, enfant du Manambemba est fier. Je remplis mon âme des merveilles du Mayombe et de la forêt équatoriale, poumon du monde. Sur les traces de Kimpavita, exhumer le royaume Congo et ses mythes. Celui d'une jeunesse vaillante, à l'époque de Kamit, dont ses épopées héritent. Notre liberté est un soleil. Nul ne peut l'empêcher de briller, rayonner. On ne portera pas que la couronne de beauté Miss Univers, car l'Afrique est dans le monde, donc le monde est africain. Ne perdez pas votre temps à l'opprimer, à faire couler son sang, son cessera. Tel un phénix, il renaîtra toujours de ses cendres. Slam!
Ah,
Thank you so much, Mariska. That was so beautiful. The world's Africa. And again, I've got goosebumps. There's a comment in the chat saying how important it is to connect Africa through poetry, and I think that's what we're doing, and through the language. And so we've only got a couple of minutes left for the session. I don't know if Raquel or Ashwin, maybe let's see if we can have a quick poem from each of you. Raquel, do you have a final poem that you would like to wrap with?
Yes, but I will also like to react to all of this because also Mariuska mentioned the light and the sun, and she brought so many references. And I was thinking that what we are also doing is a big exercise of listening what our ancestors already did. And when we think about the liberation struggle in Africa, there were a lot of militant women and men that were also poets. So poetry is also in the middle of these struggles. It's not something new. And it's very impressive how Mariuska brought so many references, and that's also an important role of going all this back. I don't know what to say. Maybe Ashwin, you can go first. Let me read the poem.
All right. Okay, so this one, because just as exploring, I keep exploring my diaspora nature. But this one it was a poem I wrote when I was reflecting on the homeless people, the homeless people in Namibia, and in Africa in general, and just calling on to that collective responsibility. I'll get into it. What is a home without shelter? What does Ubuntu Abantu mean? Is it really one for all and all for one? If any one of us is in the streets, is that what unity means? That my sisters and brothers can starve, forced to fend for each other, while I say I don't want to be bothered as I close the window, as I speed across to the other side of the street, as if their condition aren't a result of me forgetting what it means to be family, what it means to be African. There are many systems we have been forced to live with, but our sense of community must be held dear because that is who we are, each other. All humanity must remember this. To forget this tends to be the path to harming each other. Empathy, intentional on creating equity, is how we love each other. Never forgetting that freedom, health, and wealth is our collective birthright, is how we guide each other out of harmful psychosocial cycles. Sometimes it's not enough to read your Bible. It's not enough to have well wishes. It's not enough to have a policy for the poor peddled to the people to serve your politics. There's more to this. Real life that shouldn't wait for the winter or a pandemic to be remembered. If we say we want a better society, then that should include every member, because our house will only be a home when we all have shelter.
Yeah, just there's more to this. There's more to this. Goodness, thank you. Thanks, Ashwin. Okay, Raquel, did you find
I found a very short one so we don't pass time, which is called How, in Portuguese, Como. Como denegrir o negro, afugentar o refugiado, discriminar o criminoso, escravizar o escravizado, assimilar o excluído, mercantilizar a mercadoria, capitalizar o capital, gentrificar o turismo, generalizar o género, transgenizar a semente, alienar o alien, desoxigenar a atmosfera, carbonizar o ozono, aterrorizar o terrorista, desumanizar a humanidade, extinguir a espécie, matar o morto.
I think that's an absolutely perfect poem to wrap with. Thank you so much, all three of you. This has been an honor speaking with you. And there's so much that I'm going to take out of this conversation, as well as 3 new wonderful poets to follow and to read and to hear. Thank you so much. Thank you, Poetry Africa, for having us, for hosting us. And we hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you, Raquel. Thank you, Mariuska. Thank you, Ashwin.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sarah.
so
Cheers.
much.